Welcome back. This is session 2, part 2, and we're continuing with our discussion on worldview. Now, we have begun this by asking the four basic questions, beginning with origin, where did we come from? Meaning, is there meaning in life, and how do we determine what that is? Morality, is there anything that is right and wrong, and how do we know what's right and wrong? And finally, destiny, where did we come from, or where are we going? I mean, where do we end up? And so those are four important questions. And remember, not only do you have to have answers that make sense, but those answers need to be coherent together. In other words, they need to cohere, they need to hold together as a group. Um, and the reason I bring this up is I want you to know a little bit about my journey. Um, I left the church when I was a teenager. I was raised in the church, but I left as a teenager because I started to have some doubts about what I was hearing and about Christianity, about faith. And the reason for that is because I kept hearing so many other things from so many different people, and smart people. And I was thinking, hang on a second, is this really true, or is this just something that my parents have taught me? And later on, I started doing a search. I started looking into other religions. I started talking to people about what they believed and why, and reading up on this, and trying to have the answers to these questions. And what I found was the only religion that really had satisfactory answers for all of these, a coherent worldview in all of these things, was Christianity. And so I found myself being drawn back to this, and I believe that it's true. Now, and I believe that it's true for a lot of different reasons, but I want to bring it up to you because we're talking about, for you, building a foundation upon which you are going to build your family, build your marriage. And I want you to consider this. I want you to think about this. This is the preaching part of the session, of the four sessions that we're going to be looking at. And so what I want to talk about is this, that Jesus talked about this in the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount for Jesus was his most famous sermon. And he was talking to the people, and he was basically giving them insight into the kingdom of God that he came to establish. And he talked about all of the different things that he talked about, the importance of the heart over the material stuff. He talked about love and caring for one another. He talked about all kinds of different things like that. He was basically talking to them about how they ought to live, how we ought to live in this world. And at the end of it, he gave this illustration. He told this story, and I use this actually when I'm doing weddings to talk about our lives together. And he basically said this. He said there's two kinds of people in the world. He said the first kind of person are those who would hear what he's said, and then they go on and live their lives as if they have never heard what he said. So in other words, they ignore him. And that type of person is those who have built their house upon the sand. Now, you can build a house on the sand if you want to. In fact, other people have done that. You build your house on the sand, and it may look beautiful. And you may erect that house, and it's big and it's solid to the appearance, and awesome. You build your house, you live in it, but the storm comes and beats against that house. And because it's built on the sand, the foundation washes away. It has no foundation. And it falls. And because it's a big house, there's a huge disaster. That's what he says people are like if you hear what I have to say, if you hear what Jesus had to say, and we ignore him. Now, the second group of people are those who hear what he says and build their lives upon that foundation. And so that group of people, he says, are like people who build their house upon the rock. So they have a foundation upon which they begin to build their lives, and they lay that foundation and build their house that way, and it looks great, just like the first house. It looks awesome. But the same storms come. And I think this is really important because regardless of what you believe, you will have storms in this life. There are going to be hard times come. You may have a hard time thinking about that right now because when you're getting married, you have still have the twinkle in your eyes, and the honeymoon phase hasn't started yet, and life is good, and you picture that. However, there will be storms that come in your life. There will be difficult times that hit you and challenge you. And when those storms come, what happens? Well, Jesus says that when we build our house on the solid rock, on what he's teaching us, on his word, that when we build our houses like that, the storm comes, beats against the house, but the house stands. Now, it may have lost a few shingles. Some of the siding might be a little loose, but the house is standing. And that's really important. I must say, in my 37 years of marriage, almost 37 years of marriage, almost 38 years of marriage, there have been some storms in our lives. We've come through some challenging times. Sometimes when we wondered, oh my goodness, are we going to make it through this? But we have been able to, and a large reason for that, in fact, I would say the main reason for that, is that my wife and I determined from the very beginning that we were going to build our life based upon what Jesus taught us. Now, I want to tell you about why I believe that that's accurate, why I believe that that's true. And I think that this is really important for us to think about. When we look at Christianity, a lot of people look at it and they go, yeah, okay, it's been disproven. There's all kinds of reasons. Only idiots believe in Christianity and faith. And I don't want anything to do with the church because it's a bunch of hypocrites. Well, in the first place, I'm a pastor and I'm doing weddings. And I do a lot of weddings for people who would tell me that they don't believe in God. And I look at them and I'm going, okay, so you are asking me as a minister to do wedding, and you're going to take vows before God, who you say you don't believe in, and yet you're saying that the church is full of hypocrites. See, because a hypocrite is simply somebody who does what they don't believe in. All right, so let's talk a little bit about that. Why should we believe that Christianity is true? Well, there's a lot of really good reasons for that. The main reason that I want to focus on today, because we don't have a lot of time, I would love to deal with your questions, by the way. If you guys have some questions, please message me privately, and I would be glad to talk that through. In fact, if we were talking together, we would be doing this right now. We would be going back and forth with some questions, and I would welcome that. But the main reason that I believe that Christianity is true is because of Jesus Christ. Jesus was not some mythological creature. He was a person who lived in history. 2,000 years ago, there was a man named Jesus Christ. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, who was he? There's really good evidence that Jesus Christ lived, died, walked among us. We have his teachings. We have the teachings of his followers. We have the church that is left over from what he established. In fact, he established the church. And so when we begin to look at this now, the question that comes from this is, how do we know that we actually have what Jesus taught? Well, actually, we're pretty confident that we do. And the reason for that is that we have the Bible, and we can believe the Bible because of a number of reasons. We have archaeology. The Bible stands up under archaeological research. The sites that were talked about in the Gospels, which were written about the life of Jesus, have been found. In fact, the Bible has been used to discover new sites, and the Bible has not been proven to be fraudulent in those cases. It's proven to be true. So when you look at the New Testament, it's been backed up over and over again by archaeological discoveries. And then we have the Bible itself. The Bible has been compiled over centuries, and the reason we can believe that it's accurate is that we have thousands and thousands of copies dating almost all the way back to the time that it was written. And so within just a generation or two, we begin to have copies revealed, and you compare those copies, and we are confident that we have what was actually written there. So then the big question is this, and here's the fundamental question of all of it. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? Because if he didn't rise from the dead, then none of this really matters, because that's the linchpin, if you want, of Christianity. If he did rise from the dead, I think we need to listen to him. So, number one, we have the archaeological evidence. We have the biblical record, eyewitness accounts. Jesus revealed himself to hundreds of people after his death, burial, and resurrection. We have the church that began by people who ended up, the 11 remaining disciples, because Judas committed suicide after he betrayed Jesus. The 11 other disciples all died martyrs' deaths, saying, Jesus rose from the dead and we are witnesses of it. And so here's one of the biggest questions that someone asked. Why would anyone do that? Why would anyone give their life for a lie? Why would someone be willing to lay down their life for something that they know was true? Now, scholars would tell you that the disciples believed that they had seen Jesus alive after his death. Now, some people would say, well, that's a hallucination. So it never happened. They just hallucinated that they saw him. Well, here's the thing about hallucinations. There are no such thing as group hallucinations. So that might happen to one person, but it's not going to happen to a group of people. And Jesus showed himself to a group of them at a time on more than one occasion. So what were they seeing? They believed they had seen Jesus alive after his death. And they went to their graves attesting to that. And the church is built upon that truth. And I think that's very important for us to consider. So then we have the empty tomb. And the empty tomb is a huge thing. Why was the tomb empty? Well, some people would say, well, the tomb was empty because Jesus never really died. He actually fainted on the cross, and they took him down and they laid him in the tomb. And in the coolness of the tomb, he revived and he rolled a stone away, and he went out and told the disciples, that he had risen from the dead, and then he disappeared off to France and became the first of a line of kings, like the Da Vinci Code would tell us, right? Well, first of all, when we look at the stories of Jesus on the cross and what happened, first of all, people don't survive a Roman cross. No one ever survived a Roman cross. If he had survived a Roman cross, those soldiers would have been killed. That would have been the price that they would pay for allowing him to survive. They pierced his side with a spear, and from his side flowed water and blood. Now, when they wrote that, they did not realize that that is actually what happens when the blood separates. That the water and the blood separate in your blood, and that's an indicator of death. Okay, they didn't know that at the time. Modern science does, so they indicated that, and they laid him in the tomb, and then they rolled this rock. That weighed over a ton. They rolled this rock into place, and to believe that he did that himself is to believe that he somehow rolled that rock himself out of the way and then overpowered Roman guards and got away. That's a little far-fetched. Others would say, well, no, the disciples stole the body. Well, why would they do that and then give their lives for a lie? Why would they do that? Others would believe that the Romans or the Jewish leaders stole the body. But there's no reason for them to steal the body. They wanted to stop Christianity. And if they had, all they needed to do to end Christianity was to simply display the body after the fact, to bring it out and say, no, we stole the body and here it is. And it would end that religion right off the bat. But nobody could do that. So what we have to understand is this. Who was Jesus? It looks like from all observances. In fact, there are many scholars who have studied this as skeptics. We look at people like Lee Strobel and others like him. C.S. Lewis, who was an atheist scholar and a dean at Oxford University, who began to study this as a skeptic and came away with the belief deep down in his soul. He said, I was dragged kicking and screaming to Christianity because of the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. He believed because of what he saw. Okay, so we look at these things and we go, I have to figure out, did this really happen? And you owe it to yourself to ask the right questions, because this is really important. Because Jesus then went on to say, I am the way, the truth, and the life. This is what he said when he was alive as he was teaching. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. Those are very direct claims, and they're very narrow claims. And the question is not, are they narrow? They are. The question is, are they true? And so as a Christian, as a pastor, I want to challenge you as you're beginning your family, your life, to begin to research this and understand for yourself, what do I want to build my life upon? Now, here's what Francis Schaeffer, who's a Christian philosopher, talks about. That in our culture, what we have done is we've tried to do away with Christianity because we don't like what people would call the rules. We don't like the fact that, okay, God gets to tell us how to live. We want to throw aside those chains of morality, and we want to be able to do what we want to do with a clear conscience. And yet, we want to hold on to the other parts of faith. We want to hold on to meaning. We want to hold on to things like love. We want to hold on to those things because we value those things. And so, for example, when someone dies, even if we don't believe in God, we would call a minister to do a funeral most of the time. Most people would still do that. But why would we do that if we don't believe in God? Well, we do that because we need that. We need something. We need some assurance. And so what he would say is that modern man has both feet planted firmly in midair, is what he said. In other words, what we do is we have this, we look at the world as two-story. And the first story is the material world, the things that we can see and touch and feel and know, empirical things. And we can test those things. But we believe that that's the only world that there is in naturalism. That's the world we live in. But we can't live in that world. It doesn't pass the third test. If you remember the third test, which is experiential relevance, it doesn't make sense to what we feel and what we experience in life. And so what we do is when we hit those moments in our lives when we need meaning, like for example, when a child is born and we go, wow, this is wonderful, this is precious, and this is a beautiful moment. Well, really, is it? Or is it just a biological thing that happens? A child is born, who cares? It doesn't have any real meaning. We go, well, wait a minute. Yes, it does. It's a beautiful thing. It's a miracle. And we go, yes, it's a miracle. So we make this irrational leap into the second story, which is the supernatural part, which is the part that holds the meaning that is beyond the natural world. And we go, I want to hold on to that because that's really special. Or I want to believe that my mom or my dad is in a better place and there's something beyond this life. I want to believe that there is such a thing as love and that it can last forever. And that there's such a thing as marriage. And when two people make a commitment, a covenant relationship, that it matters. And I want to make this promise before God, which is what people do when they get married. But my question is, what does it mean? And I think as we begin this step, as you begin this journey together, this is a great time for you to look at the foundation of your lives. What is your life going to be built upon? Is it going to be built upon the view that, hey, you know what? We're just random, flotsam and jetsam in the universe, and here we are, and we just happen to bump into each other, and so let's make the best of this and have fun while it lasts? Or do you want to be people who look at each other and go, I'm committing myself to you for the rest of my life because I believe that life matters. And I believe that there is a God who's going to help me to do this. I'm going to tell you the truth. I believe that we can't do marriage successfully without God. God is the one who ordained marriage. We didn't just come up with it ourselves. In fact, the Bible tells us that he who finds a wife finds a good thing. God looked at man and he said, it's not good for a man to be alone. And for the men that I'm talking to, you can look at your future spouse and say, it's true. It's not good for a man to be alone. Well, why is that? Because we need each other. We complete each other. And we're going to be talking about that. We're man and we're woman. We're male and we're female. We're created differently. We're created differently because we need each other. And so what does that mean? What is the ultimate meaning in that? What can we find in Scripture to help us to learn how to be better, to grow together, to be the type of people that God has called us to be? Is this forever? Is this until death do we part? Or is this until we get bored and we go and find somebody else? Now, we would never admit that. But frankly, a lot of marriages are like that today. And so that's why I wanted to talk to you today about worldview. What is it that you really believe and why? I would encourage you, why don't you take a few moments when we're done this and just jot down a few questions that you might have. Maybe you've got some real challenges to faith. Most people do. In fact, I've done a series on this, on objections to people would have about Christianity, the main questions that they would have. Love to send you the copies of that, the answers to those questions, if you would like that. Because I really think it's important, and you owe it to yourself to check out whether or not this is true. And so I would encourage you to look at that. In fact, there's a man by the name of J. Warner Wallace, and J. Warner Wallace was a cold case detective, and he was an atheist. His wife became a Christian and challenged him to begin to look at the evidence. And he said, you know what? Why not? His job was to look back at old cold cases, in other words, murders that had not been solved from many, many years ago, and look for the evidence to find out what was true and to determine what was true. And so he began to look at the cold case evidence of Christianity. The cold case, did Jesus really rise from the dead? And the evidence that he found at the end of the day convinced him that it was true. And he actually became a Christian and actually wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity. I want to encourage you to do your own search. Maybe ask your own questions. fire them off to me. I'd love to be able to have a conversation with you. Maybe we could have a chat sometime and talk about it. But I hope that you will consider what we've talked about today, that you'll chew on this, have conversation together. And that's the beauty of this. You guys get to talk about this. At least I hope that I have caused you to begin to think about what you truly believe and why, because it does matter. God bless you. Hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.